Somewhere on a fragrance forum right now, someone is describing a scent they mostly like. Good projection, nice opening, compliments in the elevator, and then the turn. Unfortunately, the dry down is completely linear. Unfortunately. Not the dry down is linear, which suits it, not it's linear and that's what I wanted. Unfortunately. Like reporting a diagnosis, like the fragrance had potential and then threw that away. I've read this sentence in some form a few hundred times, and I want to know when linear became an accusation. And first, let's be precise about who's saying it because the word does different work in different mouths. On Fragrantica, on Perfumo, in the community reviews, not the professional tier with a ring light and a mid-roll, the actual hobbyists logging their bottles, linear usually means something narrow and literal. This smells about the same from the first spray to the last dying hour. No dramatic top that burns off, no heart that blooms in an hour, no base that arrives like a third act. You spray it and what you smell is more or less what you smell all day. That's a description. That part is fair. Some fragrances do exactly that. The problem is everything the word has been trained to carry on top of that description. And a lot of that training comes from a diagram. Every fragrance you look up arrives with a note pyramid. Top notes, heart notes, base notes. 3 tiers stacked, implying the sequence. But here's the secret about the pyramid. It's a marketing artifact, not a recipe. Inside the bottle, there are no acts. There is just a chemical soup of molecules with different weights. When you spray it, the lightest molecules evaporate immediately and the heaviest ones evaporate last. That's not magic, that's thermodynamics. And I've talked about it ad nauseum. But an overlapping gradient of evaporation is hard to sell. So, decades ago, the marketing departments drew this nice little triangle, and they sliced it into 3 neat little boxes, swapped out chemical names for romantic descriptors, and turned physics into a 3-act play. The pyramid tells you a story before you've smelled anything, and it promises you a beginning, a middle, and an end. It promises you a journey. So when you spray something and it doesn't perform the 3 acts the diagram advertised, it feels like a broken promise. I understand that. You were sold an arc. You got a straight line. Linear becomes the word for that letdown. Not because the scent is poorly made, but because the scent refused to play along with the PR department's geometry. The fragrance takes the blame for missing a promise it never actually even made. And underneath the letdown, there's a second thing. And this thing's worth being honest about. There's a hierarchy in fragrance culture, mostly unspoken, that runs like this. Complex is sophisticated, simple is basic, and the person who prefers the complex one is the more refined person in the room. Linear gets read as simple. Simple gets read as cheap. Cheap in construction, cheap in taste. And so I find this linear quietly becomes, I have a more developed palate than this fragrance requires. The critique flatters the critic. Complexity turns it into a way of buying status with adjectives. But complexity isn't a virtue. It's a variable. A composition with 40 moving parts isn't automatically better than one with 4. Any more than a sentence with 40 clauses is better than a declarative one. Nobody complains that a Ramones song doesn't have a 3rd act acoustic breakdown. It's 2 minutes of loud, fast energy, and that's exactly what you paid for. In every other medium, we understand that restraint is a choice, and usually the harder one. Fragrance is the only place I regularly watch people treat it does one thing well as a design flaw. And there's also this boring structural reason linear gets punished, and it has nothing to do with the scent. Linear fragrance is hard to review. It doesn't change. There's nothing to narrate. No 20 minutes in, the pepper gives way. No arc to walk you through. 10 minutes into wearing it, the reviewer has already said everything there is to say. And a review needs to run longer than that. So the fragrance that refuses to hand you a story becomes functionally the fragrance that wasted your time. Linear isn't the problem for the wearer. It's the problem for the word count. It's hard to monetize a 10-second review. Now, and this part matters. There's a real version of this complaint, and I'm not going to pretend there isn't, because there are 2 kinds of linear, and the word collapses them into one. There's the fragrance that's linear because it's hollow. One loud aroma chemical doing all the work. Nothing built underneath it, no development, because there's nothing down there to develop. That's a legitimate criticism. You're smelling a sketch that got sold to you as a painting. And then there's the fragrance that's linear by design. The Soliflor that wants to be one flower beautifully for 8 hours. The leather that's supposed to stay leather. The whole point is precision, a single clear idea held steady, not allowed to wander off. And because of the literal laws of evaporation, keeping a scent perfectly suspended like that is a massive technical achievement. It isn't a failure of construction. That is the construction. To think that a perfumer would fail, a master perfumer would fail by making a linear fragrance, that baffles me. And it's the hardest thing to pull off because there's nowhere to hide. Same word, opposite achievements, and the reviewer almost never tells you which one you're looking at. And here's the thing, none of this is a flaw at all. Maybe it's just taste, because some people genuinely want the story. They want the top to burn off, the heart to open, and the base to arrive an hour later like a plot twist. They want the thing to unfold over an afternoon, and when it doesn't, they feel shortchanged. That's real. That's a legitimate thing to want. But some people just want to smell good. That's the whole ask. No arc, no third act, no journey. They couldn't give a shit about the journey. They wanted to spray it in the morning and smell great until the next shower. Unchanged, reliable, done. And that also is completely fine. That is arguably the entire point of wearing a fragrance in the first place. Neither of those people are wrong. One of them wants a movie, the other wants a photograph. The mistake isn't preferring one over the other. The mistake is dressing your preference up as the fragrance's problem. And that's the actual problem. Not that linear is secretly good, not that complexity is secretly bad. The problem is that linear is a description being used as a verdict. It tells you the scent doesn't change. It does not tell you whether that's a flaw or the entire point. And those are not the same fragrance, and they don't deserve the same word and the same disappointed tone. So, the next time you read that a dry down is unfortunately linear, the useful question isn't whether the reviewer is right, it's whether they did the work of telling you which kind of linear they meant. Most of the time, they didn't. They just told you they wanted a story and the fragrance gave them a straight line. And instead of questioning their own expectations, they blamed the fragrance. This has been Fragrans Veritas. My name's Chris. Thank you so much for watching.